The stars stretched across the black canvas like scattered diamonds, and Lieutenant Marcus Webb stared at them through the observation deck window of the research vessel Horizon Dawn, thinking about how far humanity had come in just 200 years and wondering if they had come too far too fast. The distress signal had appeared 3 days ago, coming from a region of space that no human ship had ever explored before, and Captain Helen Moore had made the decision to investigate, despite the protests from some of the crew who thought they should stick to their original mission of surveying mineral deposits on the outer colonies. But Helen was not the type to ignore a call for help, especially one that seemed to come from an intelligent source. Marcus had been on the bridge when they first detected the alien vessel drifting in the void, like a dying whale, its hull covered in symbols that seemed to shift and shimmer in ways that hurt the eyes if you stared too long, and Helen had ordered a careful approach with all weapon systems on standby, just in case this was some kind of trap. The ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of the Horizon Dawn, and its design was unlike anything in human records, all flowing curves in organic shapes that seemed more grown than built. And when the scanning team reported life signs aboard, everyone had fallen silent, because this was at the moment humanity had been waiting for since they first looked up at the night sky. Helen had chosen Marcus to lead the boarding party along with Dr. Lisa Grant, the xenobiologist, and 2 security officers named Kyle and Amy, who carried pulse rifles but had strict orders not to fire unless absolutely necessary. And as they crossed the void in their shuttle, Marcus felt his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it through his suit. The airlock on the alien ship had opened for them without any prompting, as if it had been expecting visitors, and the atmosphere inside was breathable according to their scanners, though Lisa insisted they keep their helmets on until they knew more about potential pathogens or toxins. The interior of the ship was beautiful in a way that made Marcus forget to breathe for a moment, with walls that glowed softly with bioluminescent patterns, and floors that felt almost soft beneath their boots, like walking on moss, and the corridors curved and twisted in ways that seemed random at first, but gradually he realized they followed some kind of mathematical pattern he could not quite grasp. They found the survivors in what appeared to be a medical bay or perhaps a ceremonial chamber. It was hard to tell with alien architecture, and there were 12 of them lying in pods that looked like crystalline cocoons, and 11 of them were clearly dead, their bodies already beginning to dissolve into some kind of organic residue, but the 12th pod still glowed with a faint inner light. Lisa approached it carefully, her scanner held out in front of her like a shield, and she gasped when she saw what was inside, because the alien was humanoid enough to be shocking, with 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and a head, but different enough to be unmistakably other. Her skin was a deep blue that shifted to purple in the shadows, and her features were delicate, almost fragile, with large eyes that remained closed and hair that floated around her head, like she was underwater, even though there was no liquid in the pod, and she wore what looked like ceremonial robes made of some material that seemed to be woven from light itself. Marcus stepped closer, and as he did, the alien's eyes opened, and they were golden like captured sunlight, and she looked right at him with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step back. And then she smiled, and it was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he had ever seen. Pod opened with a sound like breaking glass, and she sat up slowly, as if waking from a long sleep, and when she spoke, her voice was musical and strange, and none of them could understand a word. But Lisa's translator was already working, analyzing the sounds and building a linguistic database. It took 3 hours before they could communicate in any meaningful way, and by then Helen had brought the Horizon Dawn alongside the alien vessel and established a hard dock, because she wanted their medbay on standby in case the survivor needed help. Though Lisa pointed out they had no idea how to treat alien biology. Her name was something that the translator rendered as Aria, though Marcus suspected that was just an approximation of a sound that human mouths could not quite make, and she was indeed a princess of her people. The Kelther, who had been traveling with her family and advisors when their ship had been attacked by a rival faction, the Kelther were an old race, older than humanity by millions of years, and they had seen civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy like waves on a shore, and they had chosen long ago to become observers and scholars rather than conquerors or empire builders. Arya told them this in bits and pieces, as her strength returned and as she learned to use the translator more effectively, and she explained that her people had been fleeing to a sanctuary world when they were ambushed, and her guards had fought valiantly, but in the end, they were overwhelmed, and she had been placed in the emergency stasis pod by her dying guardian, who had set the distress beacon before succumbing to her wounds. Marcus found himself drawn to her in ways he could not explain or justify, and it was not just her alien beauty, though that was certainly part of it, but something deeper, something about the way she carried herself with a dignity that spoke of centuries of breeding and culture, and the way her eyes seemed to hold both great sadness and great hope. Helen was cautious about bringing Arya aboard the Horizon Dawn, at first worried about contamination or conflict, but Lisa's tests showed that the princess posed no biological threat, and Arya herself seemed genuinely grateful for the rescue and curious about these strange new beings who had found her. The crew was divided in their reactions to their guest, with some like Kyle viewing her with suspicion, and others like Amy completely fascinated and eager to learn everything about Kelthar culture and technology, and Arya handled it all with grace, answering questions when she could and politely declining when the subject touched on things that were sacred or secret to her people. Marcus was assigned to be her liaison and guide, which meant he spent hours each day with her, showing her around the ship and explaining human technology and customs, and in turn she told him about her world, which orbited a binary star system and had oceans that sang and forests where the trees communicated through touch. She told him about the great libraries of the Kelthar, where knowledge from 1,000 worlds was stored not in databanks, but in living crystal that could share memories directly with those who knew how to interface with it, and about the temples where her people went to meditate and connect with what she called the song, which seemed to be their equivalent of a universal consciousness, or perhaps a god. As the days passed, Marcus realized he was falling for her, and it was absurd and impossible and completely against protocol, but he could not help himself, and he thought maybe she felt something too, from the way she would touch his arm when they talked, and the way her eyes would light up when he entered a room. Helen noticed, of course, because Helen noticed everything, and she called Marcus to her office one evening and told him to be careful because they were in uncharted territory in more ways than one, and getting emotionally involved with an alien princess whose people they knew nothing about was asking for trouble. But Marcus could not stop himself any more than he could stop breathing, and when Arya asked him to show her the observation deck late one night when most of the crew was asleep, he agreed without hesitation. They stood together looking out at the stars, and she told him that her people had a saying that every being was born from starlight and would return to it eventually, and that the connections they made in between were what gave life meaning. And Marcus said that humans believed something similar, that they were all made of star stuff, as one of their ancient scientists had said. Then Arya did something unexpected and reached up and touched the side of Marcus's face with her hand, and her skin was warm and soft despite its alien color, and she said that she had been taught to fear other species because her people's isolation had made them suspicious and closed off, but that he had shown her that connection was possible across any divide. Marcus felt his heart racing, and before he could think about what he was doing, he leaned in and kissed her, and for a moment she stiffened in surprise, but then she relaxed and kissed him back, and it was electric and strange and perfect. Pulled apart after a moment, both breathing hard, and Arya was smiling that same smile from when she had first opened her eyes in the pod, and Marcus felt like he could not breathe for an entirely different reason now. But their moment was shattered by an alarm blaring through the ship, and Helen's voice coming over the comm system telling everyone to report to stations because they had incoming ships, and the signatures matched the ones from Arya's description of her attackers. The next hour was chaos as the Horizon Dawn prepared for a fight they were not equipped for, because they were a research vessel, not a warship, and the enemy ships were closing fast, 3 of them each bristling with weapons that made their own defensive systems look like children's toys. Arya insisted on going to the bridge, and when Helen tried to refuse, she said something in her own language that the translator rendered as a command that carried the weight of royal authority, and Helen relented because what choice did she have?